A good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to round 7 of the AROC Formula Alpha Championship for 2023. We're here at Mugello for round 7. A fantastic circuit. What a way to kick off the second half of the season now. Would you believe it already? Apologies for no qualifying this evening, but I thought I'd jump in the intermission to give you a rundown of how the session went for some of the participants. So I can tell you that it is Will Inglis who is on pole here at Mugello with a fantastic 1:25.4 as his best lap, followed by Alan Matthews 1:26.1, Paul Brady 1:26.5, Jack Hodson in P4 1:26.7, Alex Smith 1:26.9. Then we have Paul Millman, Barry Clayton, Andrew Ryan and Steve Knight rounding out the running for this evening's racing. Now, in between the last time that we were live, unfortunately we missed the touring car round last week, so apologies for that one. A couple of internet issues saw us off the air. Well, we could have gone online, but we would have had approximately 40% drop frames, maybe 30% drop frames, so we decided to stay offline for the time being. We are now, however, on the grid, ready for race 1. It's 40 seconds to go until lights out here with Will Inglis and Alan Matthews. Now, the astute among you, if you are on the timing server, which you can visit at aroc2.emperorservers.com/live-timing, you may notice that everyone is now a pro driver. We've decided to change the way the class system works, mainly owing to the kind of the number of participants we have in the championship and the fact that everyone's driving standard is now so good that we're having interclass battles, so we decided to sort of combine it a little bit. But that isn't what's important right now. What is important is it is only about 5 seconds until lights out. Now, who's going to get the better run down towards turn 1? It's all important here. There's a lot of momentum to carry. It's 6 red lights on the gantry, and we are away. 25 minutes to go of racing then. Push-to-pass system being used on Will Inglis' car, but is it enough to keep Alan Matthews at bay? He got a fantastic launch, and I'm not quite sure if he is able to manage him for this time being. Alex Smith and Andrew Brammer battling out, Paul Brady rather, battling it out, and that is Alan Matthews off. That is a disaster of a start to the race for him. That means Will Inglis is now looking a little bit more comfortable at the start of this race. 7/10 down to Paul Brady in P2. Alex Smith very much hot on his heels there, followed very close behind indeed by Jack Hodson. Jack Hodson hunting him down as much as possible. Very compact grid as we head down towards the middle sector of the circuit. Although I say middle sector, it's a very short lap in such capable cars. So we're already not too far away from the final few corners of this Mugello circuit. What to watch out for at Mugello then? It is it's a tricky circuit, I would describe this one as. It's very technical, as has been the theme really of the Formula Alpha running so far this season, and it's tempting. Some of the corners, shall we say, they look like they're going to be easy, flat, nice high-speed corners like these long sweeping hairpins here. However, with the camber changes, the elevation changes, some of the braking zones can really catch you out. In particular, the chicane heading down towards the final couple of corners looks like you don't have to do that much braking. Looks like if you're really brave, you can carry it flat. And I think if you are brave enough in these cars, you can carry it flat. However, it can very easily go wrong there and you're off and into the gravel. It's an old school circuit this, so it's gravel everywhere, which is what we like to see, but that really does punish the drivers. Meanwhile, speaking of punishing the drivers, I think Paul Millman is trying to punish Alan Matthews for a bit of a poor getaway onto the start-finish straight for the start of lap 2, because he's hot on Alan Matthews' heels here, but hasn't been able to keep up with him heading into the first corner once again. We're on board with Will Inglis. Will Inglis, obviously our pole man here, is currently 3 seconds in the lead of this race. He's got good pace at this Mugello circuit. Let's see if he can carry that into the race. Meanwhile, on board with Paul Brady, 6/10 separating him and Alex Smith. Alex Smith far more interested in what's going on behind. It's Jack Hodson, only 4/10 down at this point in time. Our two closest cars on track then are Paul Brady and Alex Smith. Alex Smith once again being hunted down rather by Jack Hodson. I think we're going to have a bit of a procession between these three as we head down towards the final part of this lap once again. We could be in for a little bit of not a DRS train, obviously we don't run DRS, but a bit of a push-to-pass train potentially, because from looking at the circuit, there's only one major opportunity really to deploy that push-to-pass system, and I would say it is the start-finish straight. There's nowhere else that's really long enough to justify the use of that system, which deploys for a good number of seconds before you could potentially mess up your lap. I think back to the last time I drove one of these cars and accidentally left the push-pass system on, heading through a high-speed corner. Obviously, big boost in power. It can go very wrong indeed. As we see the brakes glowing red hot, nearly white hot in fact, on Paul Brady's car to make the car slow down enough for the first corner. On board then with Jack Hodson, about a second separating him and Alan Matthews. So Alan Matthews actually on for a good recovery in this race so far, up into 5th. It looked like the commentator's curse is once again in full effect. I do apologise. I remember back to Australia where the commentator's curse was terrible really. It was ruining races, and it's certainly not ruined Alan Matthews' race. Alan Matthews' race was rather ruined on the first couple of corners, but it's certainly not helping it at this point in time, shall we say. His progress that we were commenting on about how well he was doing to get up into P5, he's now back in P6, looking to try and get past Paul Millman, back into P5 once again. But if he can break his way into that top half of the grid, he can start setting his sights on a podium. Maybe we've still got 20 minutes, well, more than 20 minutes in fact, to go in this race. That is plenty of time. Anything could happen just yet. It might be a little bit more difficult to keep up with the likes of Will Inglis at this stage. He is far and away the quickest car on track at the moment. He's broken away from Paul Brady by about 4 seconds, despite Paul's best efforts. I can say that Paul's just set a personal best Sector 1 and a purple Sector 2, but there's little that Paul Brady can do just yet with that 4-second delta. Alan Matthews then just about gets past Paul Millman as we head down the start-finish straight once again. Alan Matthews on the push-to-pass system, but Paul Millman seems to have great runs into that final corner. As we see side-by-side now, briefly side-by-side, I argue Alan Matthews just about saved by that push-to-pass system, stays in front for turn 1, but if Paul Millman is really absolutely nailing the exit of that final corner, we could see another battle between these two heading into that first corner once again, unless Alan Matthews can really pull out an impressive lap here, and that certainly looks to be the case so far. He's made half a second already as we head into the middle sector now. In terms of the setup on cars, this is of course an open setup championship. Drivers are free to change the parameters of the car as they see fit, what suits their needs best. But I want to have a look at the difference between Alan Matthews and Paul Millman here. I can tell you that Paul Millman has a much faster car in a straight line. In fact, he's the fastest car on the grid. It's 294 kilometers through the speed kilometers an hour through the speed trap for Paul Millman. But I want to have a look at Alex Smith here. Alex Smith doing a very nice job indeed of running in P4 for the first 5 minutes of this race. Now sees himself down in P7, and we're looking at in the past few rounds, we're starting to see a bit of a momentum shift for Alex Smith. Obviously, he's hoping to fight for that championship. Will Inglis is doing a very good job of that at this point in time, but he's one of the faster drivers in the series. He was certainly in the mix in terms of trying to get as many points as possible, and it's at this stage in the championship where he really needs to carry on that momentum that it started to pick up. He needs to carry on those consistent performances where he did have issues. He's diving into the pits, in fact. The car must be carrying some damage. This is a disaster for him in this race. He's going to drop to last position now. But of course, with the grid being so close to everyone on the lead lap. But it's around this time in the championship where we really need to start getting those more secure finishes in. And now we had, obviously, a few race wins in the past few rounds and a good number of points to bag as well. And they weren't easy for him, let's point that out. He did have a few issues. He certainly did have a few issues, but he was able to recover it. Will he be able to recover it once again this weekend? I'm not quite so sure. It's not a good way to start, and it doesn't bode well for his championship fight. It doesn't bode well for anyone else's if you go on board with Will Inglis. And have a look at his purple middle sector here. It's a 24 flat, in fact, through that middle sector that is absolutely flying along with Will Inglis here. He's now 7 seconds clear of the rest of the field. We're only 7 minutes in. It's about a second per minute. Could we see a near 30-second delta as we head into the later stages of this race? It's certainly not out of the cards as we see Will Inglis using that push-to-pass system. I think in a similar manner to the way that Paul Millman is using it as you just about exit the radius of the corner of the last corner onto the start-finish straight. That obviously gets you a brilliant run out of that final corner. However, you are compromised running into this first corner. Not a concern for Will Inglis. He's got no one to defend against right now. But it could be a concern for a defending driver, which at one point Paul Millman was. Or rather, he was an attacking driver, but defending his position that he held for so long. And that is another purple sector for Will Inglis at the end of that lap there. Yes, 294 kilometres an hour for Paul Millman through the speed trap sees him as one of the quicker cars on track. So clearly, some differences to be had in the setup as we go on board with who we're going to go on board with. Let's go on board with Paul Millman, aforementioned, of course. He is running nicely in P5. They're not quite there to battle with Alan Matthews, but certainly keeping up with him. If you compare their current pace, they are both in the low 128. So Paul Millman running well here at Mugello so far this weekend, and Andrew Brammer is going to be his nearest threat so far. Barry Clayton's one to watch out for, actually. He's just posted a purple Sector 1, is about 10 seconds off where he'd like to be. We know Barry Clayton, we know how much he likes to race, how competitive he is as well. He'd like to be there in that mid-pack action, battling to try and claw his way towards a podium, but has just gone purple Sector 1 to try and make that possible. Andrew Brammer could be a threat for Paul Millman. If he starts pushing a little bit more, he'll get into the 128s, but for now, Paul Millman looking in a good position at this point in time. On board then with Andrew Brammer in that Earth Dreams inspired livery there. Is a fantastic livery on his car. One of my favourites so far. I wouldn't say we're going to go delve into livery chat once again. It's almost like it's an endurance event. It's not, although if I wish I was there for last week's touring car action where it was inadvertently an endurance event, as we see the push-to-pass system being deployed on Paul Millman's car there late into the start-finish straight there. So that's an interesting change in tactic for him. But the touring car action was inadvertently set to, well, wasn't set to, or something went on that meant that it was 75 minutes worth of running. So I'm actually very sad that I ended up missing out on that running, because that would have been very interesting indeed to see the 75s in, not 75s, apologies. Oh no, 75s. It's been a long time since I've done a touring car race, as it turns out. So I do apologise for the error there. No, of course, no, I am completely wrong. It's not 75 at all. It's 155 Ti. Moving on from Reeve has seemingly forgotten his Buso-powered Alfas. Moving on from that one. But we're on board with Paul Millman once again now. And yeah, he's lapping very nicely indeed. Now, willing list, let's check on the willing list time and see how he's doing to try and head towards that 30-second delta. He's currently lapping about 10 seconds ahead of the rest of the field. 10 seconds ahead of Paul Brady now. Good performance from Paul Brady, actually, to see this so far. Obviously, flames on the overrun for willing list, and as he heads through the chicane there, very, very capable cars indeed. Make this look easy. I can tell you that Mugello certainly not an easy circuit. I look back actually to it was George Russell in a unfortunately not an Alfa. It was in the Williams a few years back, and it was very impressive indeed to see him narrate a lap, commentate a lap of Mugello far better than I could. I'd just like to add, while also just casually driving one of the Formula 1 cars that he was talking about. And that does not mean that this is an easy circuit at all to navigate. It's very, very technical indeed. But speaking of the championship hopefuls, the likes of Alex Smith, he is, of course, second in this championship in his attempts to hunt down willing list. There were only 50 points. That gap is going to extend at this rate because Alex Smith is by far and away the last car in the running at this point in time, which is a great shame because it's been a real opportunity for him to try and close that gap, or at least minimise the damage to that gap to Will Inglis. Alex Smith in second, 174 points. Will Inglis leads by 228 as things stand at this point in time as we head into race 1. That will of course change heading later on into the weekend. And we have Barry Clayton in P3. Again, not the best race for him in terms of the championship standings. Alan Matthews will do well in this race, currently running in P4. Good recovery for him so far in this race. 131 points, so he will leapfrog Barry Clayton at this point in time. Paul Millman actually had a fantastic season so far. In P5, 123 points. Paul Brady will, however, jump ahead of him with 118 points at this point in time. He's running 6th in the championship, but 2nd in this race. Then we have Jack Hodson. Again, another great race for him. We're seeing a real tide shift, I think, in the championship standings at this point in the season. We start to see drivers climb the way, settle into another part of the standings that perhaps they weren't expecting to after the first couple of rounds. Jack Hodson, P7, 94 points. Bear in mind, we're talking about 94 points in P7, which goes to show how competitive the running has been so far. He's going to do well in this race. And we have Andrew Brammer, again, another driver who should take home a good few points. Currently in P8 in the championship, 90 points to his name. Then we have Rob Whitney in P9, Alan Thomas, registered P10 in the pros. But, of course, this all changes based on the way the new class system works. Haven't quite wrapped my head around it fully, unfortunately. I do apologise for that one. But once I've re-educated myself, shall we say, it'll be a little bit more clear. Then we have, in terms of the AM runners, or what were the AM runners, Guy Strawberry, 266 points, of course, because we will still be doing separate trophies, just have to clarify that. And towards the end of the season, separate trophies, but combined running in the session. Guy Strawberry, 266 points, leading fairly comfortably there. Then we have Steve Knight, 201 points. Get well soon, by the way, Guy. I know you might be watching, but you're currently suffering from a bit of a cold, which is a shame. Perhaps one negative effect of the Spring Alpha Day, which by everything I can see online, looked like a fantastic day there. Steve Knight, 201 points to his name. Alan Thomas, 117 points to his name, P3. And that rounds out the AM runners for this season. We have 10 minutes to go in this session end. Will Inglis hasn't quite made up that second per minute challenge that we gave him, although I don't want to give him any ideas, just in case the other competitors want to have a go at me for that one. I apologise if I give Will Inglis some ideas and we see him in race 2 just kind of break away as if he was running a different car. But Will Inglis currently leading this race by 13 seconds now as we start another lap here on board with the race leader. Then we have Andrew Brammer, Jack Hodson, Alan Matthews, Paul Millman, Paul Brady, Jack Hodson, Alan Matthews, Paul Millman, Andrew Brammer, Barry Clayton, Steve Knight, and Alex Smith. Now, Steve Knight, I'm not sure if I believe he's dropped back, has had a couple of issues. That has allowed Alex Smith, I imagine, a bit of a reference. This could be very useful for him indeed in this race. He's 3 seconds off at this point in time, currently in the 126s. His best lap, 126.3. So despite a pit stop, despite an opportunity to put a fresh set of rubber on, he hasn't quite been able to match Will Inglis' 125.5, which is a blistering lap for Will Inglis there. Let's have a look actually at the podium sitters in this race then. Paul Brady currently sat in P2, has done for quite a while now, looking quite comfortable there. A position that Alan Matthews potentially feels he should have had. Let's see, is Alan Matthews still within a shout of the podium here? As we have a 2-second gap between Alan Matthews in P4 here and Jack Hodson in P3. Here they are in the same frame on screen. 1.6 seconds separates them now. As we have a look at Alan Matthews' best lap, it is a 1 minute 26.7. His rivals, his best lap at Jack Hodson, 1 minute 26.9. So slightly slower in absolute pace for Jack Hodson. In terms of current pace, it's 128.2. For Alan Matthews, rather, it's a 127.6. So things are looking to be swaying momentum-wise into Alan Matthews' hands here. Alan Matthews potentially going to be hunting down Jack Hodson in the next couple of minutes. So Jack Hodson could have his work cut out for him trying to defend this podium against Alan Matthews, who of course started on the front row of the grid. In terms of another rival, Paul Brady seems to be fairly comfortable at this point in time. Last lap at 127.6. His best lap though in the 126s, along with Jack Hodson and Alan Matthews. So he's matching their pace, but importantly for him, he's got a 6-second delta, which could make all the difference in this race. We do only have 8 minutes remaining, so the drivers are going to have to start thinking about their late race strategy. What do they do to try and make those all-important final moves to try and bag as many points as possible from this race? I can tell you that Alan Matthews' next move will just, well, for him, hopefully, for his sake, will be against Jack Hodson. He'll be hoping to just hunt down that car in front as much as possible, as Steve Knight and Alex Smith are now trading positions here. Alex Smith, of course, had a very long pit stop indeed. Did not get the start to this race that he would have wanted. As there's now massive contact between Alan Matthews and Jack Hodson. They actually, very lucky indeed, didn't... No major negative effects of that. I can tell you that Alan Matthews has some front wing damage. Jack Hodson has some rear wing damage as well. But, all things considered, that was a very high-speed impact at a very high-speed part of the circuit. That could have ended so much worse for both cars involved there. That could have been race-ending, or at least race-destroying. That could have been those wiped out, their podium prospects completely and utterly annihilated. However, it wasn't. They are both able to carry on. That gap that Alan Matthews had narrowed down to tenths is now seconds once again. But it's not too many seconds, importantly, for him. And we are going to have this battle once again, ladies and gentlemen, in just a couple of laps' time, if that. As we see, Alex Smith, Steve Knight trading positions once again. This time, Alex Smith does get past Steve Knight there. The drivers now in P3 and P4 have a very difficult job indeed. They are running towards the end of the race, but the stakes have never been higher for them. The pressure is arguably the highest it's been all race, apart from maybe the start of the race. They've now got to contend with damage as well. They've got to remind themselves that these cars are not going to behave exactly as they did just one lap ago. And Alan Matthews has just had a nasty reminder of that, ladies and gentlemen. The back end getting away from him as he headed towards the chicane, or the slight chicane on the exit. And he has now got a massive amount of off-road running. There'll be huge amounts of dirt and grass on all over his car, and that surely must spell an end for him. He's got 8 seconds to make up between him and Jack Hodson. 5 minutes, 6 minutes in fact, to go in this race. There is Paul Millman, now only 3 seconds behind. Remember I was saying that Paul Millman could prove a challenge just yet, had some great pace underneath and was matching Alan Matthews in some aspects. Well, here's another chance, Paul, to demonstrate what you have got in this race, because there's only 4 seconds separating you and Alan Matthews, and Alan Matthews is certainly not looking on form at this point in time. His car not behaving the way that he would want late on in this race. As I was literally in the middle of saying, with a little bit of damage, these cars could catch the drivers out, as they're going to try and push them under more pressure than perhaps they have for the rest of this race. These overtakes matter more and more the more the clock ticks down. And now Alan Matthews has unfortunately found that to be the case in a rather difficult fashion. He's now in P4 as Alan Matthews, comfortably in P4 as well. Jack Hodson can breathe a sigh of relief, as can Paul Brady. In fact, Paul Brady has no major challenges. He'd, I'm sure, rather be putting a challenge on Will Inglis, who was absolutely broken away now, 18 seconds to the lead of the race. But Alan Matthews, really, I think the best course of action for him is to just settle in and make sure he keeps Paul Millman at bay. Paul Millman, of course, has to be very wary of Andrew Brammer. Andrew Brammer doing a good job here. Let's have a look at their pace at the moment. It's a 127.9 on that previous, apologies, no, it's a 127.9 as their best lap for Paul Millman, and then for Andrew Brammer it's a 128.2. So they are close, but still plays into Paul Millman's hands. In terms of the previous lap, Paul Millman 129s, Andrew Brammer in the low 128s. So Andrew Brammer has the pace at the moment, so this could be a bit of a saving grace for Alan Matthews if Paul Millman can be distracted by what's going on with the car behind. I think Alan Matthews can breathe a bit of a sigh of relief. Not as much as he would have wanted to, though, because he's not going to be fighting for that podium position that it looked like he was poised to take just a few laps ago. Just to give mention, actually, just on the off chance that any of you are watching, or you do, I'm sure you do follow along with AROC News. I'd like to say I really do quite like the new section that has been launched, the AROC Ragazzi section, aimed at our younger members, of which I am increasingly not these days. I'm just about qualified for, I say just about, I've got a couple of years left in me before I'm no longer considered a ragazzi. But yes, if you are perhaps new to the world of AROC and getting more involved now that we have this new section, I hope you're enjoying watching. I hope you maybe consider having a look at taking part in the AROC Racing Leagues, which is one of my favourite parts, of course, of the whole AROC community. On board with Andrew Brammer at the moment then, and he is closing in on Paul Millman as we head around that final corner once again. Paul Millman's going to have to deploy the Paul Millman Masterclass out of that final corner. Yes, he does. He uses that push-to-pass system. Means he gets a great run heading across the start-finish line here. However, will this compromise his defence now, running into that first corner of the lap? It's going to be a very good defence from Paul Millman indeed. Positions his car just nicely as to not open the door too much on either corner or either side of the car, rather, to tempt Andrew Rammer into a move here. Andrew Rammer knew that he wasn't going to get a move done, and now we head into the slightly twisty part of the circuit, where of course it's a relatively narrow track as well. So Paul Millman, potentially a bit of respite for him. I'd argue turn 1 is the prime overtaking opportunity on the circuit. You do have a couple more. You have arguably the run round the last corner if you're particularly brave. You have the chicane heading into sector 3, and you have a couple of the other chicanes as well. But turn 1 is your most important braking zone here on this circuit. But that's not to say that the rest of them aren't important. This track is quite often about momentum, so you want to try and carry as much of that as possible without overdoing it, without trying to put too much energy through the tyres and overworking the car. And I will say, on the whole, these drivers, given how technical it is, have absolutely nailed that so far this evening. Has Paul Millman nailed it enough, though, as we head down towards the last part of the lap once again? Not only has he had Andrew Brammer to deal with, but now that these two have been battling, they've been slowing each other down. There's Barry Clayton in the mix as well. Barry could see some of that race-leading pace that he's demonstrated so many times. There's all three drivers now deploying that push-to-pass system. That could bode well for Paul Millman running into turn 1. He doesn't have to worry about the threat of the cars from behind, but he still does anyway. Actually, I'm going to counteract myself there, because now, look, near enough side by side, it's going to be Andrew Brammer and Paul Millman. Andrew Brammer, in fact, getting out in head, gets a nose in front, has the inside line there, and is in P5 for the time being. Will he keep it, though? Yes, he will. That is a move done for Andrew Brammer. Potentially a benefit of that slipstream working to full effect there. Let's have a look at the speed trap to verify that. But now, Paul Millman is so comfortable in P5 for quite a long time now, could potentially be under threat of dropping back to P7, which would be a great shame for him after such good running in this race. So yes, that previous run through the speed trap, all drivers around the 287 km/h mark. So Paul Millman, we've known, has run slightly less aero throughout the rest of this race, but with that push of the slipstream from behind, Andrew Brammer and Barry Clayton did benefit. In fact, Barry Clayton benefited the most there, clocking 290 km/h. The timer is getting oh so close to 10 seconds left to go, and we will not, in fact, have 3 more laps of this race. This is the penultimate lap of this race. We're on board with Will Inglis now. I'm completely wrong. We will indeed have 2 more laps of this race. We're on the penultimate lap at this point in time. Barry Clayton has, unfortunately for Paul Millman, been able to overtake. It's now Barry Clayton in P6 and Paul Millman in P7. But Will Inglis now on the penultimate lap of this race with a 22-second margin. It's been very impressive indeed from him so far, race 1. And we still have another race to go. The reverse grid race coming up in just a few moments' time. So that will be very interesting to see how the momentum shifts throughout the grid. On board then with Andrew Brammer. Andrew Brammer could potentially be under threat from Barry Clayton here in just a few moments' time if we're not careful, because only a second separating these 2 cars now. Let's have a look at their pace in a moment. Previous lap, a 1:27 for Barry Clayton. Correction, it's 1 minute 30 on that previous lap for Barry Clayton, 1 minute 26.1. So actually, Andrew Brammer looking relatively comfortable here. Interesting to see the times really starting to drop off for some drivers now. We do run 1 compound, but I think it's really been tested to limit here at Mugello. We have a track temperature of 36 degrees, which is not the hottest we've seen, but could certainly be quite challenging still. I must admit, I'm not quite sure on the abrasiveness of this tarmac. I know it's not the freshest tarmac in the world, but it's certainly not the worst. It's by no means I think Jeddah's one of the more abrasive circuits from the top of my mind. That doesn't matter too much though at this point in time, because we are going to go on board with Will Inglis in just a moment's time, as Andrew Brammer seems to have quashed the threats from the car behind here as we head into the last part of the lap. On board with Will Inglis, we haven't actually seen too much of him in this race. Often is the race leader's curse, particularly if you're doing a fantastic job. Oh dear. Now, I wondered if it was possible that the lap times were due to tyres. I also wondered if there's a small potential of it being due to fuel loads. And I'm here to say right now, Will Inglis did have a great delta to P2, but it's not going to be enough. Will Inglis has ran out of fuel right on the last lap. It is now Paul Brady who is leading this race. And this is why I say stay tuned until the very end, folks, because you never know what's going to happen. Commiserations to Will Inglis there. The engine giving up, I suspect due to fuel load or maybe something else as well. But Will Inglis has come to a complete halt, will not make it to the end of this race. From glory to complete devastation, it's now Paul Brady who is able to capitalise on the misfortunes of others. It's Paul Brady who's going to cross the line and take the race 1 victory. Would you believe it, ladies? I am in complete shock. I can't remember the last time we've had such a just utterly bewildering finish to a race. That is devastation for Will Inglis there. It's going to be Jack Hodson who comes across the line to take P2. Alan Matthews will come home P3. Great recovery for him. Commiserations to Will Inglis. That car can only crawl around now to make it to the end of the race, and he will be drop dead last, effectively. It's going to be Andrew Rammer coming home P4. Barry Clayton P5 in the end. Paul Milman will be coming home P6, and Will Inglis currently P7, but we could see... I think we are going to see... We will see Alex Smith. In fact... Oh, will we? Alex Smith has a couple of issues there. Alex Smith's now going to get ahead of Will Inglis and will score more points. So actually, we were chatting about how Alex Smith is not going to have a great day for his championship here. He will, in fact, close the gap to Will Inglis. He will outscore him quite comfortably, which is an utter disaster for Will Inglis, I think. In fact, no, it may be the case that Alex Smith is already a lap down. Apologies there. We'll have a look in the intermission as to what has gone on with Will Inglis's race there. But that is great camaraderie there from Alex Smith anyway. He is pushing Will Inglis across the line, and I imagine there will be some shenanigans in the paddock grid chat right now. I can only imagine what is going on in that Discord chat at this point in time. But what brilliant sportsmanship from Alex Smith to push his comrade home there and get Will Inglis across the line. We have the proper race finishers here joining in as well. But that is a twist the likes of which we haven't seen for quite some time, folks. I've never seen a more comfortable race lead disappear in the blink of an eye like that. The commentator's curse is in effect once again, ladies and gentlemen. He looked absolutely fine, and then we went on board with him as the lead lap competitors head into the pits. We see Will Inglis being pushed across the line. We weren't expecting that now, were we, ladies and gentlemen? As Alan Matthews rounds the circuit once again. It is Paul Brady who takes the race 1 victory. What a finish that is, as Will Inglis does in fact finish, is classified P7 in the end. That is a complete disaster for Will Inglis. Commiserations, but that is racing sometimes. What a finish. That will go down, I think, as one of his most memorable moments of definitely the season, if not his running so far. And what a shame to see an otherwise fantastically executed race end in the way it did. However, it bodes well for the reverse good race coming up in just a few moments' time, so we'll catch you then. Well, we are back on the grid, ladies and gentlemen. Only 40 seconds to go until lights out, and here is the running order. It is Steve Knight, Alex Smith, Willing Liss, so that's going to be a very interesting battle there. Then we have Paul Millen, Barry Clayton, and then we have Andrew Brammer, Alan Matthews, and then we have... Oh dear, what's going on with my timing system? Oh, okay, never mind. Timing system having a couple of issues there. And then it's Jack Hodson and Paul Brady. I think that was possibly due to the fact that it's decided that I am, in fact, playing on a steering wheel. I can tell you I'm not commentating on a steering wheel. I am more interested in the fact that we have 6 red lights on the gantry. And we are away. Willing Liss immediately trying his best to get back to the front of the running here, using that push-pass system to get a brilliant launch, and now does lead this race, heading into the first corner, side by side with Alex Smith. And here's the battle that we want, the battle for the championship, and it's playing out in the first corner. Willing Liss does get out in front briefly, very closely followed by Alex Smith and Barry Clayton. In fact, Barry Clayton showing that front-running pace that we know that he does have. In fact, all the front-runners from where we'd expect, or at least the expected front-runners, getting a great start to this reverse grid race. And it's now Andrew Brammer in P4, Paul Millman up in P5, Paul Brady in P6, so not the best start for him. Steve Knight, unfortunately, as well, not the best start, dropping down to P7. And likewise, Jack Hodson and Alan Matthews really struggling at the start of this race. I think they've had an incident. I knew you said incident then. If you know the meme, you know the meme. But as we have Jack Hodson and Alan Matthews having a coming together, or issues at least at the start of this race, see them now comfortably at the back of the running. Now, Willing Liss is, in fact, breaking away from the field. We've seen this before, ladies and gentlemen. The question is, has he put the fuel in? Or has he looked after his engine well enough to make sure it will make it home? That is the all-important question here. We know he's got the pace. Arguably, there's nothing that can be done by the other drivers, really. I hate to be a spoil sport. There's nothing really that can be done too much by the other drivers to keep Willing Liss at bay. It's just a question of whether or not that car can get home. We're not sure what's going on. Oh, and that certainly won't help Alex Smith's course. Was he trying to keep himself awake there? Because that certainly would have woken me up as you run in P2 and dive onto the grass there. You've got Barry Clayton for company now. Because that was a very close call indeed with that inside wall. That could have ended in disaster there. Speeds of nearly 180 miles an hour in these cars, of course, at this circuit. That would not have been a minor impact as we head down into the middle sector with these drivers now. We have actually, I was about to say, if you ignore Alan Matthews here, I'm not sure what's gone on with him. We have a fairly even field spread. The top 6, which is 2/3 of the grid, spread by only 5.5 seconds, and all of those drivers having pretty much half. Oh dear, Alex Smith, disaster at the start of this race. Much like we had in race 1, his hopes of trying to extend or close in that championship gap between him and Willing Liss appear to be dashed at the start of this race. Will that withhold? We will soon find out. However, we're on board now with Andrew Brammer and Paul Millman. We know that Andrew Brammer had the pace to get past Paul Millman. In fact, this was the order between these three just a few minutes ago. It was Barry Clayton, Andrew Brammer, you have to swap those around, and then Paul Millman. Will Paul Millman be able to do a bit of a role reversal this time and get ahead of these two drivers back for P4? We know he's got the pace for it. It's just whether or not those moves can be strung together, as we have Jack Hodson now ahead of Steve Knight. Steve Knight having a couple of issues there, I feel, is now in P9 with Alan Matthews overtaking him and doing his best to claw his way back into the main race running now. On board then with Willing Liss already into the 27s with a full tank of fuel on board. Hopefully a full tank of fuel, hopefully more fuel on board. Impressive indeed. I believe he is... I believe, if I know Willing Liss, he will have jumped in midway through and probably put in 5 more litres at least, just to make... The car might be a bit heavier, we might not have the ultimate pace, but he'll be doing quite well here. We're on board now with Paul Brady. He is now in a bit of an Andrew Brammer and Paul Millman sandwich. He's had a great recovery in this race so far. In fact, of course, lap 1 didn't go too well for him. He now finds himself in P4, and he's certainly got the pace to rival the cars around him. He's ahead of Paul Millman. The Battle of the Pauls resumes once again. I believe it was a Giulietta round where we last had the Battle of the Pauls. That was a few seasons ago as well. Middle of lockdown, I believe that was, in fact. So it was great to have the Battle of the Pauls resuming once again between Paul Brady and Paul Millman. This time it is Paul Brady who comes out on top in his efforts to hunt down Andrew Brammer, but it's certainly going too well for it's not going too well for him, it must be said, because Paul Millman is certainly keeping the pressure on in the 129s at this point in time, along with the cars around him. Alex Smith then currently in P6, not where he wanted to be when just a few laps ago he was in P2 battling or keeping the pressure on Willingliss. Willingliss, by the way, now 6.5 seconds clear of the rest of the field with... Here we have Andrew Brammer currently running on the podium under threat from Paul Brady. Paul Brady using that push-to-pass system early down the start-finish straight. We've seen that as I think we had a bit of a paradigm shift throughout race 1. We started to see more drivers preferring to use that early push-to-pass system rather than the late one, as we have Paul Brady, in fact, demonstrating why you don't need it heading into turn 1, getting ahead of Andrew Brammer now. It is Paul Brady back on the podium here in race 2. Of course, our race 1 victor. He'll be doing very well this weekend if he can take even more impressive points away from this race here. And speaking of the points, let's have a look at how they are standing now after that surprisingly nuanced race 1, as it turned out. So Willingliss, 234 points to his name. He does take points from race 1, as it turns out. Alex Smith, 178. So race, despite the issues that Willingliss suffered, that not going his way at all. Alan Matthews, 146 points, and then Paul Brady, 143 there. As we have Jack Hodson and Alex Smith trading positions, Alex Smith dropping into P7. Then we have Barry Clayton just behind Paul Brady, Paul Millman not too far off those, 131. Then P7 we have Jack Hodson, P8 Andrew Brammer, and then we have Steve Knight not able to close up, notably to Guy Swarbrick in the AM running so far. So Barry Clayton now stands at 8 seconds behind Willingliss. I think at this point the rest of the drivers have to ignore the presence of Willingliss until the fuel light goes yellow. But we go on board with Andrew, in fact no, it's Paul Brady at this point in time, of course. Both drivers on that push-to-pass system right at the early part of the start-finish straight now, as we have late braking from Andrew Brammer. Then side by side, he was looking at a move around the outside. It would have been very impressive here with all of these corner radiuses and this tight circuit. If he could have got a move to stick around the outside, impressive indeed. It wasn't to be, unfortunately, for him, so it is still Paul Brady in the lead of this battle in P3 at this point in time. But one interesting thing to note about the usage of the push-to-pass system at a circuit like Mugello is you've got to choose a competitive time at which to use that push-to-pass system. We're starting to seeing a lot of drivers use it earlier on. That may be because you get more of a, if it makes any sense, more of a percentage gain out of using it lower down the rev range. You get that bigger bump in power, and obviously the way the gearing and the revs work of the car, if you're right at the top of the rev limit already, there's going to be not too much point to deploying that extra bump of power. Now, some drivers might have geared the cars a little bit longer to benefit from a run down towards turn 1. However, by looks of things, it's not the longest gearing we've seen from these cars. Therefore, I think some of the drivers opting to try and use it as low down in the rev range or gears as possible to try and get the best benefit, or try and make the most efficient use of that push-to-pass system. And we are seeing it being deployed well by some drivers here in this battle, because they've been hot on each other's heels for a good few minutes now. It is Barry Clayton in P2. He's showing some great pace here. I think an unfortunate race 1 star stifled what would have been a great showing from him in race 1. Then we have Paul Brady in P3, Andrew Brammer in P4, about a second down on him. Then we have about a second down on him is Paul Millman. Then we have a little bit of a wait down to Jack Cotton, Alex Smith, Alan Matthews and Steve Knight. 3 drivers there not getting the race start that they would have liked. Alex Smith using that push-to-pass system a little bit later into the straight there. And then we have Paul Brady, in fact, getting ahead of Barry Clayton. Didn't quite catch that one, unfortunately. Not sure what went on there, but it is now Paul Brady in P2, Barry Clayton in P3, and Andrew Brammer hot on Barry Clayton's heels in P4. I suspect there might have been a potential issue on board with Barry Clayton's car there, which is a great shame. Potential, another example of the commentator's curse, as we were just chatting, complimenting about how well he was doing. But Barry Clayton currently running in P3 under pressure from Andrew Brammer as we head closer to the halfway stage of this race. Now we have a 4-way battle in effect for P2 here. Of course, do not count Paul Millman out by any means at all. If anything goes wrong on this very tight and technical circuit between the 3 cars in front of him, Paul Millman is poised and in a fantastic position to take a podium here, and some good points to boot as well. That hasn't been the case so far. I'm sure he doesn't want to see anyone's races ruined, anyone's competition kind of taken away from him, but I'm sure he's half fingers crossed for a bit of argy-bargy between the 2 cars up in front. Barry Clayton then using that push-to-pass system did have an issue in that previous lap. It's a 1:31 flat compared to the 29s around him. Is recovering well from that incident as things turn out. on board then with Barry Clayton and Andrew Brammer. Only 0.8 of a second separating these two, and of course Paul Millman in the mix as well, only 0.7 separating him and Andrew Brammer. These are the closest cars on track at this point in time. Not to be outdone though, it is in fact Jack Hodson and Alex Smith. These two, we haven't seen too much recently in the form of a battle between these two cars, so it'll be very interesting to see how this develops as we head down towards the middle part of the lap. In fact, I'll make that the last part of the lap. In fact, no, don't. It is the middle part of the lap. And it is Jack Hodson in P6 defending from Alex Smith. In terms of their pace at the moment, it's a 120 to 130.0 on in terms of current pace for Jack Hodson, and then Alex Smith on the previous lap 128.1. So great momentum in Alex Smith's favour. But that momentum has been dampened slightly by the fact that you've got to have such a larger pace delta, pace advantage, to get ahead of the car you're trying to overtake. It's one thing to catch up and another thing to make the overtake, and we are seeing a prime example of that now. Alex Smith, who had a 2-second pace advantage, finds himself stuck behind Jack Hodson, and there is Alan Matthews just to make matters more difficult for him as we head onto the start-finish straight. There is Jack Hodson not using that push-to-pass system. The cars behind him will, in fact, make use of it. This is played very nicely into Alex Smith's hands as we have Alan Matthews has to wait just that little bit longer. Has he timed it perfectly though? Will he have more momentum heading into the braking zone for turn 1? We'll just have to wait and find out, folks, as we head into that first corner then. It is Alex Smith who is still out in front, followed by Alan Matthews and then Jack Hodson. So Jack Hodson losing 2 positions in one straight. Not a way to start the lap. Not a preferable way to start the lap rather. As we're on board with Andrew Brammer now. It looked to be getting a little bit spicy between Andrew Brammer and Paul Millman for a brief moment then, if you're paying attention to the timing tower. Things have died down a little bit though, although they're still within 1 second. There is Barry Clayton up in front. He's been able to break away just a little bit and is doing very well to keep up with Paul Brady. Paul Brady, just like Will Inglis, a car that we haven't spoken too much about in this race because they've been doing an impressive job of leading, managing the pace, controlling the race. But I would like to say that Barry Clayton very close indeed to Paul Brady at this point in time in terms of pace, both in the mid 127s and both setting. In fact, no, Paul Brady setting his best lap on the previous lap, so he's clearly responding to that charge. He sees Barry Clayton as a threat, and Barry Clayton, I'm sure, will respond to that, and they'll start to push each other as we now cross the halfway stage in this race. Alex Smith and Alan Matthews, meanwhile, now getting very close and will be enjoying a battle here. This time it will be Alex Smith on the defence. Alan Matthews doing his best to try and get past both drivers using that push-to-pass system. Jack Hodson learning from his mistakes and using it even earlier than before. However, he's too far back to make any real difference in this battle as we're on board with Alex Smith heading down towards that first corner. It's going to be Alan Matthews who has the outside. Who's going to be braver on the brakes? Who's going to go late to try and head around the outside? It's going to be an attempt from Alan Matthews, but unfortunately for him, nothing did come of it, and it's still Alex Smith leading as we head into the middle sector here. And the middle sector is almost, I think, a little bit of breathing space potentially on this lap. It's a time where you're not under too much threat, although you will be if you have an off like that. Alex Smith does have an off like that. The commentator's curse has been so rampant over the past couple of rounds here, and now we have Alex Smith dropping back behind Alan Matthews and potentially behind Jack Hodson rather. Of course, if you have an off like that, you start to pick up kind of debris and grass and dirt, and that can lead to some interesting handling characteristics and could lead to more issues. And what's just happened on screen, ladies and gentlemen? Exactly that. It's Alex Smith now in P8 behind Jack Hodson, and it's not been a weekend to remember really for Alex Smith, who I believe is still running on controller after all these seasons. If you are, if that is the case, that is still an impressive feat. But unfortunately for Alex Smith, his championship hopes looking more and more dashed by the weekend if they keep going this way. Unfortunately for him, Will Inglis very much in control at this point in time, and Alex Smith a race really, or a weekend rather, to forget as things stand. He might be hoping for a Will Inglis fueling issue once again. In Will Inglis' defence, Will Inglis, I do not believe, owns a Mito, but I suspect this is an issue with some other Alfa Romeos, and Mito owners will concur with me. I suspect all the cars that share the same fuel cell, the same fuel system parts. He very well could have started that lap with a half a tank of fuel left. However, that second half, and more specifically that kind of lower fifth, lower quarter, disappears at such an alarming rate in comparison to the rest of the fuel gauge that maybe that's what the issue was. He thought he had enough fuel to get round the race, but it just transpired that that wasn't the case in the end. The fuel just mysteriously vanishing. as we have him starting another lap here, just lapping for the first time, Steve Knight now, as we enter the 10 minutes remaining points in this race. As we have his brake disc glowing red hot there. He's been lapping very impressively indeed so far in this race. His best lap at 1:26.3. That wasn't a lap that was set on brand new fresh tyres on a low fuel run as he clearly started race 1 with. But instead he's setting those laps right now, I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen. 10 minutes to go. Obviously the fuel load will be a little bit lighter. Those tyres will be nicely bedded in though, and certainly feeling the effects of 20 minutes of running. I can tell you that it's a last lap was 1:26.39, his best at 1:26.34. So he's got race leading and race dominating pace, it could be argued. Someone who might not be displaying that right now though is Paul Brady. Barry Clayton has been quietly setting the consistent and important and impressive laps here, as now only 3/10 of the gearbox of Paul Brady as we head into the middle part of this lap. And this could spell trouble for Paul Brady. Paul Brady, who has looked in control, looked so comfortable in race 1, has looked so comfortable for the majority of race 2 now, is for the first time really potentially under threat now. He has an impressive amount of straight line speed there, not to be outdone though. Andrew Rammer 300 kilometers an hour on the previous run through the speed trap, so that's an impressive feat. But we're 10 laps into this race and Andrew Rammer is starting to feel the pressure from Barry Clayton. In terms of current pace, and it's a 1:27.1, in terms of outright pace, 1:27.1 for Paul Brady, 1:26.7 for Barry Clayton. Then we have a 1:27.5 for Paul Brady and then a 1:27.0 for Barry Clayton. So it's all to play for here, ladies and gentlemen. They are very close indeed, both on the push-to-pass system now as we start another lap. Heading then down towards the end of the first sector, start-finish straight, not providing too many opportunities for an overtake for Barry Clayton. And Paul Brady, in fact, are doing a very impressive job on the defence here. He's not only keeping him just behind, but he's able to break away in some sectors. I'd say we're seeing quite an important contrast in certain mini-sectors on this track between the two drivers here. Some strengths on Barry Clayton's part, and then some strength on Paul Brady's part as well. While all this has been happening, by the way, I'd just like to point out that Will Inglis has now nearly broken the 20-second margin in terms of a gap to the rest of the field, which, as we learned in race 1, could make all the difference. Really, he'll be hoping that if he does run out of fuel, it's maybe on the final corner. It doesn't matter quite as much as it did in race 1. I do apologise. I will eventually stop with all the digs about running out of fuel. It's just such a twist of events. Could we see another one here in the battle between Paul Brady and Barry Clayton as we head down the start-finish straight once again? Both drivers on the push-to-pass system at the very start of the straight. Who will come out on top as we crest the hill? They are side by side now. It's Paul Brady who takes the inside line there, but will Barry Clayton be so late on the brakes and head it round the outside? No, he can't quite. No, he can. Maybe he can. They are still side by side here, and there might have been contact between the two. In fact, there was, but it's Paul Brady who still has the lead of this battle here. Barry Clayton has to settle for P3. It was a particularly brave feat if he would have made it stuck to have got around the outside here at turn 1 at Mugello. It doesn't look like a move that has been on at any point this weekend, and that remains the case as we head into the final few minutes of race 2 now. There's only 7/10 of a second separating Barry Clayton and Paul Brady. Make that 6/10 of a second. I think we're seeing this sector 1, sector 2 strength of Paul Brady being equalised by Barry Clayton having a fantastic run through that final sector and catching up as we head into sector 1, into turn 1 rather. Will we see a repeat of that now as we head down towards the final part of the lap? There is traffic this time around that could have some influence on this battle here as we head into the final couple of corners on the lap. Steve Knight is very much entitled to run his own race, but I'm sure Paul Brady and Barry Clayton will be politely asking him if he would concede position for just the time being, and he is able to do so with relative ease this time as we start on the start-finish straight. Once again is Barry Clayton with a 7/10 gap here. It could make all the difference on the push-pass system earlier than Barry Clayton, but Barry Clayton we've seen has some impressive straight-line pace as we head down towards the first corner once again. Going to be near enough side by side as we head onto the crest of the hill once again. Not quite this time round. We're going to wait until later into the braking zone, and Barry Clayton gets side by side, but unfortunately for him isn't quite able to get that move to stick 6. It's Barry Clayton back in P3 once again. Paul Brady in P2. Only 4/10 of a second though. These two have been so close together for so long in this race now. Very impressive feat indeed. I think Barry Clayton might have just clipped some grass there. Was lucky to be able to carry on there and didn't have any major ill effects. It has dropped back to about 5/10 behind now, or 8/10 in fact, make that now. So we could start to see maybe the effects of exhaustion on the driver, the tyres starting to wear out just that little bit more. For whatever reason, we'll start to see maybe the pace drop off. Will he recover those? We head down that start-finish straight once again. He's certainly in the zone that he wants to be in. Not quite the zone that he wants to be in. He'd rather be in the zone that is ahead of that car in front of him. But he's still in a comfortable position here. He could try and force an error if he can't get past. With 5 minutes to go in this race, we've certainly seen before. Anything can happen just yet. As we head around that final corner once again, all the action is between P2 and P3 at the moment. The battle for the second spot on the podium rages on. Of course, the likes of Andrew Brammer would be very happy if these two maybe had a couple of difficulties in this battle, as Barry Clayton does in fact get past Paul Brady on the final corner of that lap there, and in fact it's getting a little bit heated between these two. Elbows out then as we head down the start finish straight. Barry Clayton dips onto the grass there, and that means Paul Brady gets a much better run into that first corner and now is back ahead once again. When it looked like the move was all said and done, it is Paul Brady able to reverse Barry Clayton's fortune. The back end on Barry Clayton's car actually looking a little bit unsettled as he made his moves to head into the second and third corners there. Just want to give mention to, by the way, 25-second gap. It is now a purple Sector 1 and Sector 2 for Will Inglis as we head round the lap once again. He is the only car in Sector 3 at this point in time, which is very impressive indeed. And I think we'll be on for a bit of a blistering lap here as we wait to see what is going on with the battle for P3. It seems to be that Barry Clayton has dropped back somewhat. We're on board with Will Inglis, not quite to celebrate his race victory, although nothing's given, as we learnt in race 1. But we're going to see what he posts as an impressive lap here. He crosses the line with a 1 minute 25.3. That is purple in all 3 sectors. So it just goes to show he could have gone for the Grand Slam this weekend. Had race 1 not gone his way, he was of course on pole, and he's looking to take that race 2 victory at this point in time. But we have a look at, once again, the battle between Paul Brady and Barry Clayton, which seems to have come to an unfortunate premature end here. As we're on board with Andrew Brammer then, the battle between him and Paul Milne was looking a little bit dicey at one point. It seems to have expanded out as well, and it might be the case now that drivers are starting to settle into a bit more of a groove, a bit more of a rhythm. Things start to die down as we get to the later parts of the race. Maybe drivers trying to conserve a little bit of grip, get the cars ready once again into a comfortable window for one last charge for that car for the position in front. We'll just have to wait and see if that is the case, but Paul Milne is certainly keeping Andrew Brammer busy at this stage in the race. And here we have Will Inglis crossing that line once again. That gap now standing at 27 seconds. I'd say Will Inglis has looked to be one of the higher downforce cars so far this evening. We haven't seen speeds eclipse the likes of 290 kilometers an hour. That could also be the case of he hasn't had any cars slipstream. Maybe he's just been so comfortable out in the front there that he hasn't felt too much of a need to deploy that push-to-pass system. I know from my very limited experience, although it's probably more down to me than being competitive in these cars. I imagine these drivers don't have such an issue. I'd often forget it was there. But that is probably more a reflection on me than it is on the drivers. As we see Will Inglis doing a very good job indeed. I just want to have a quick look at the team radio action. I just want to mention that Will, obviously Alex having the issues earlier on, and they've settled their issues by Will Inglis offering Alex a beer. So all is well in the Formula Alpha paddock. But all is settled. All matters are easily resolved. No need for any FIA or no need for any appeals. 3 weeks later, it's all done and dusted. And there was an offer of a beer, so all is well. As we have Andrew Brammer then lapping in a fairly comfortable position. Actually, has been able to keep Paul Milne at bay. hasn't quite been able to catch up to Barry Clayton. I have a feeling that's a bit of a misnomer, because we saw Barry Clayton was a little bit closer to Paul Brady a few laps ago, and of course those two slowed each other down with their battling. But Andrew Brammer, once again, this always happens with Andrew Brammer. He, unfortunately for him, isn't quite always there in the podium scoring positions, although has been on a number of occasions now. Certainly got the pace to do so on his day, but is always there to pick up the good solid points in the midfield. Top end of the midfield, usually where he seems to settle in the races. Always quietly has a great race no matter what is going on. Now the timer is about to hit 0. We are now on the penultimate lap of this race, unfortunately, and there we have Will Inglis now 27 seconds ahead of the rest of the pack. What an impressive feat here. As we go on board with Alan Matthews. Alan Matthews now about 1.6 seconds ahead of Alex Smith. These two, I feel, are one of our major losses from this race. The issues they had earlier in the race. Alex Smith continuing to have issues, in fact, as on cue. Apologies there, the commentator's curse back in effect. Actually, contact between him and Steve Knight. But we could see Jack Hodson and Alex Smith trading positions in just a moment's time. But yes, it has been unfortunate to see some very competitive cars indeed. We saw the pace that Alan Matthews had very early on in race 1, and and of course in qualifying, and then we saw that Alex Smith certainly had race-leading pace as well. Maybe not race-leading, but certainly up there with the best. Unfortunately, these two having issues this weekend that have just meant that they've been kind of almost squashed out. They've almost kind of been silenced, and unfortunately that is just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes, and that is racing, and they will be picking up rubber and hoping to try and get a better weekend in a fortnight time, of course, if they are partaking in the touring car action in a week's time as well. As we have Will Inglis starting the final lap of the race with a 27-second margin to the cars behind. It's looking very impressive indeed as we head into the first corner. This is the lap where it all went wrong. We watched with bated breath as we hope for Will Inglis' sake he gets the race victory, which he deserves so much. He deserved it in race 1, let's be honest, and he's looking on course to get it in race 2 as well. Even if he wasn't able to put any more fuel in, he was close enough where you think he could have got across the line with a bit of lift and go. So I suspect with such a margin, he's deployed a little bit of lift and coast in this race. Heading around the long, sweeping corner towards the end of Sector 2, then has only Steve Knight for accompany a car. He's already lapped at this point and will look to lap again here, just to really consolidate his impressive finish in this race. Heading around the final chicane then. A little bit more scary than it looks, that last chicane on the track. The tyres, of course, have had a full lap of abuse, and then you're asking them to do just one last high-speed manoeuvre before you have another high-speed manoeuvre running onto the start-finish straight. They've all been high-speed manoeuvres for Will Inglis, because it has been such an impressive drive. He didn't get it in race 1, but he will come home in race 2 to take the race 2 victory. Congratulations, Will, for what has been dominating performance all weekend. As we have now a small wait, really, for Paul Brady to come home in just a few moments' time. He's heading towards the final corner himself now, and yes, what a race finish it has been. I suspect Will Inglis has already started the victory donut, of course. Push the pass system then being used for Paul Brady. He does come home P2, well-deserved P2 at that as well. So P1 and P2 for Paul Brady. He takes the most points this weekend. Barry Clayton rounds out the podium with a P3, a well-deserved P3 as well. I feel like we were robbed of that in race 1. We got it in race 2, though. Then we have Andrew Brammer coming home in once again an impressive drive, takes home some good points to come home P4. Not too far behind at all. Good drive for Paul Millman as we have him coming home P5. Then we have a little bit of a wait down to P6, but we have some victory burnouts for Will Inglis, some victory donuts for Paul Brady, and then we have Barry Clayton waiting to come in here. Then we have Alan Matthews coming home in just a moment's time here. A shame, really, we didn't quite get the running that we have come to expect from Alan Matthews. He's had some great pace and demonstrated some great pace here. Unfortunately, it wasn't to be here this weekend. Magello comes home P6, and then we have, once again, same case for Alex Smith, comes home P7, and then Jack Hodson rounds out the running, coming home P8. As Will Inglis' tyres are looking definitely well used at this point in time. Then we have Andrew Brammer in P4, Alan Matthews currently in P6 here. We'll get to see some victory notes from him in just a moment. There we go. Alex Smith partaking as well, which is great to see. We're about to have some from Jack Hodson as well. I think we will. You can usually tell if they've started or not by the fact that the tyres have still got pressure in them. that was very nearly in the tyre wall, Jack. Don't think we didn't see that one because we did B- for the donuts there. A plus for effort, really, for Willing. Oh no, I'll give you an A. We'll give you an A on the basis that's not much of a donut we're currently seeing. We are seeing, though, is tyres. It's a very interesting chemical process here. What you're seeing is tyres being converted into vapour. It's an impressive reaction, and it involves lots of petrol and high RPMs. And then we have Alan Matthews. Yeah, there we go. And I think that rounds out the victory donut here. We could sit here and watch. Has Willingness actually got up and left his Simrig now? I suspect he's making use of all the extra fuel that he's got on board. He's probably got about 10 minutes of this left in the tank, so we could be here for quite a while if we chose to just sit here and watch. I suspect he's got off up the Simrig, got a brick on the throttle and the brake, and just kind of left it there. But yes, he's certainly got plenty of fuel to do it now, I suspect. Anyway, that rounds out what has been a very fascinating weekend at Mugello indeed. I certainly hope you've enjoyed watching as much as I've enjoyed commentating, and I will catch you in a fortnight's time for the next Formula Alpha action. Thank you very much.